Dust rose in lazy spirals behind the wagon line as it creaked across the Wyoming plains, brittle and sun-bleached like the bones of some dying god. The sky was a hard, cloudless stretch of copper blue, and below it the prairie lay cracked and hollow. A girl sat in the back of the last wagon, silent, barefoot, knees drawn tight beneath her belly. Her dress thin calico and torn at the shoulder clung to her like second skin. Her name was Hattie, and at 13 her eyes had already learned not to expect kindness. She rested one trembling hand on her swollen stomach. Flies buzzed around her face, but she didn't lift a hand to swat them away. Her lips were cracked from thirst, her skin pale as smoke. Around her wrist was tied a faded, blue ribbon one that had once belonged to her mother, long before the fever took her during a winter birth gone wrong. The ribbon was the only softness left in Hattie's world. They didn't care who the father was. Only that she was no longer worth feeding, the voice of the land might have said, if it could speak. She'd grown up in a small frontier town where the church bells rang louder than the law. When her belly started to show, it wasn't the man's shame they whispered about. It was hers. Her father had called her a harlot, slapped her across the mouth when she asked who would help her. That night she'd watched from the window as he traded her for a jug of rum and 3 sacks of dry beans to a traveling fur trader with rotted teeth and greedy eyes. The wagon jerked and halted suddenly, yelling men, then gunfire. It all unraveled in seconds. The trader screamed once before something wet hit the canvas above her. She scrambled out the back, barefoot, stumbling into the brush like a spooked deer. She didn't stop to look back. The only thing louder than her heartbeat was the sound of men shouting, horses screeching, and the crack of rifles behind her. She ran until the sun dipped low and the scrubland swallowed her. She found shelter in a crease of stone, a hollow between 2 split boulders. Thorns had clawed her arms bloody, and her belly ached like it was being pulled from the inside. Her breaths came shallow, sharp. That night the wind howled through the rocks like a warning, and in the distance wolves sang to the moon with the hunger of things forgotten. She curled into herself, clutching her stomach, trembling with the pain of it, the cold of it, the shame of it all. No one would find her, no one would care, that much she knew. But then, hoofbeats, slow, measured, not the wild gallop of bandits. This was different. A figure appeared at the edge of the rock, half shadow, half man. His horse exhaled steam as it came to a stop. The man stepped down stiffly, like every joint in his body had forgotten how to move without hurting. He wore a long duster coat caked in dust and blood. His beard was more gray than black. Scars lined the side of his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. He didn't speak right away. He knelt, pulling a dented canteen from his belt and holding it out. She didn't move. "You bleeding?" he asked, voice like gravel soaked in whiskey. She flinched. He nodded once, not unkindly. "You don't look like you got much time left." She wanted to speak, to scream, to tell him to leave her alone, but her lips wouldn't open. She didn't know if she was more afraid of him, or of being alone another night. The man didn't ask again. He set the canteen down just beyond her reach, stood and walked back toward his horse. He didn't mount. He simply stood there, hands on the saddle horn, eyes fixed on the horizon like a man watching for ghosts. In the silence that followed, the girl reached for the water. The canteen was cool to the touch. The blue ribbon fluttered in the wind. He didn't speak much the next morning, just nudged his horse closer to the ledge where she lay huddled, and gestured for her to climb up behind him. She didn't move. So he dismounted, scooped her up like she weighed nothing, and placed her on the saddle without asking permission. The coat around his shoulders came off and went around hers. It smelled of smoke and leather and something faintly like cedar. They didn't ride far, just to a clearing tucked between shale cliffs and pine. A small stream trickled nearby. It was quiet enough that even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. He got to work without words, gathered wood, built a lean-to from fallen branches and dried hides, started a fire using a flint stone and fingers that looked stiff with age and memory. He boiled some roots in a dented tin pot, mashed them into a paste, and offered them with a piece of hardtack softened by water. She ate slowly, eyes never leaving him. When she finished, he pointed to her shoe torn at the seam, nearly useless. He knelt beside her, pulled a thick needle from his bag, and began to stitch it closed. Each motion careful, practiced. He didn't meet her gaze, didn't touch more than necessary. When she winced, he paused, waited, then continued. She didn't ask his name, he didn't offer it. That night she curled up under the lean-to, wrapped in his coat, one hand on her stomach, the other clutching the ribbon on her wrist. The air was sharp and cold. Somewhere in the trees an owl hooted once, and fell silent. In the firelight the man sat with a piece of wood in his hand and a small carving knife in the other. He shaved at it slowly, not shaping it into anything yet, just letting the blade move. His eyes flickered orange from the flames, and in them something moved beneath the surface, something long buried. He remembered a girl with blonde curls, running barefoot in the tall grass, chasing butterflies. His daughter. She'd died of fever while he fought for the Confederacy fighting for a country that didn't want him back. His wife passed soon after. Smallpox took her, same year the bank took their farm. Now he rode alone. Just him, his horse, his rifle, and the ghost that never left him. People in town still spat when he passed by, muttering "Reb" under their breath, so he stopped going to towns. Found work trapping, trading pelts, moving through country where no one asked who he used to be. But that night, in the firelight, he caught her watching him. Her eyes didn't accuse. They didn't plead. They just held the kind of weariness only someone who'd seen too much could carry. He turned his gaze away, back to the flame, and his hand trembled slightly as he lifted her water skin and set it near her feet. When the storm rolled in the next day, it did so fast, no warning, no time. A wall of dark clouds swept in from the north, and the rain hit like falling stones. Wind howled through the pine, and the lean-to collapsed under a branch. Hattie screamed as the cold rain soaked her, her belly tightening in waves of pain. He was on her in seconds, lifting her like a sack of flour, his arms steady but his face clenched with fear. Blood ran down his cheek from a thorn scratch. He didn't speak, didn't grunt, just pushed forward through the driving rain into the tree line. They found shelter in a cave, dry and quiet except for the low rumble of thunder outside. He laid her down on a stack of pelts he kept for sleeping, stripped the wet coat from her shoulders, then moved back, but her hand shot out and caught his wrist. "Please," she said through gritted teeth, "don't leave." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. He knelt beside her, silent as ever, watching as she writhed with pain. His knuckles turned white around the hilt of his knife. Not because he meant to use it, but because he didn't know how to stop the thing rising in his chest. That old, buried ache. That fear of watching something so small and innocent die again. Hours passed. Her breathing slowed. Then came the sound, the soft broken cry of a child. Not hers, his in his memory, but layered now with something real. A baby's wail echoed off the cave walls. Colt stood at the mouth of the cave, rifle in hand, his silhouette a jagged piece of history against the pale light outside. The storm had moved on. The earth smelled of pine and wet stone. Behind him the crying stopped. She was alive, and so was the child. He didn't move from the entrance, just stood like a sentry, like a man who'd sworn without words not to fail again. The baby came just as the first crack of light split the dark horizon. Hattie had screamed through the night, clutching Colt's hand like a lifeline. Her face was pale, slick with sweat, teeth clenched so tightly they left bruises in her gums. Colt did what he could: boiled water, laid down clean pelts, whispered things he hadn't spoken in years. Not prayers exactly. Just words. Useless, maybe, but steady. When the crying started hers first, then the baby's, it was like something broke loose in the cave. A long-held breath, finally exhaled. Colt moved fast, but gently, wrapping the tiny, red-faced girl in a rabbit pelt. She squirmed, fists like wrinkled knots, mouth wide in protest. Hattie turned her head, too weak to sit up. "Is she okay?" She whispered. Colt didn't answer right away. He just looked at the child. His eyes shone in the cave light. She's perfect, he said. You did it. She swallowed hard. Can I keep her? Colt met her gaze, voice rough. She's yours now. No one can take her. They stayed in that cave for 2 days. Colt hunted rabbits and brought back wild roots. Hattie fed the baby as best she could. Colt built a fire ring just outside the entrance to keep wild animals away. He thought maybe, just maybe, they'd bought themselves peace, but the past has a long reach. On the 3rd day, Colt saw the dust cloud. A gang of men on horseback, 5 or 6 riding hard, coming from the east. He knew the look of them even before the brass buttons and fake cavalry jackets gave them away. Scalp hunters. Bandits dressed like soldiers. He'd tangled with one of them before, back near Cheyenne, over land, over blood, over lies told by rich men who thought they owned the frontier. Colt had killed one in a duel. The dead man's brothers had been hunting him ever since. He didn't panic. He just walked back into the cave and laid his hand gently on Hattie's shoulder. They're coming, he said. Pack what you can. Take the baby. She didn't ask who died. By the time they reached the tree line, the riders were near. Colt helped her up into a natural hollow in the side of an old cedar tree, just big enough for her and the baby to crouch. He handed her the canteen and his knife. You stay here, he said. No matter what you hear. She gripped his arm. Don't let them see her. He nodded once, then stepped into the open with his rifle drawn. The leader of the ganglong coat. Redbeard, cocky like a snake who knows its poisonous grin when he saw Colt. Well, if it ain't the ghost of Blackroot Gulch, he said. Heard you took off with a squaw and a pregnant brat? Colt didn't flinch. Turn around. There's nothing here for you. Another man, younger, leaned out from behind the Redbeard and grinned. That one's still warm? He said, gesturing toward the woods. Colt didn't even blink. He cocked his rifle. Touch her, he said, calm as winter, and I'll bury you with your teeth in your pocket. The first shot cracked like thunder. Colt dropped the man who'd spoken out of turn. Chaos followed. Gunfire echoed through the pines. Colt moved like a man with nothing left to lose, taking out another before they got within 10 yards. But one got close, too close. The bullet ripped through his shoulder, spinning him to the dirt. He fired back, grazing the rider's leg, sending him toppling from her hiding place. Hattie covered the baby's mouth as it began to cry. She could see flashes of movement through the bark smoke, muzzle fire, blood on the snow. And then, just beyond the tree line, a gray wolf stood watching her. Thin, silent, its eyes the color of twilight. She whispered to it, Go away, please. It held her gaze a moment longer, then vanished back into the woods, when the shooting stopped. The world felt impossibly still. She crept out of the hollow. Baby clutched against her chest and ran to where Colt lay slumped against the base of a tree. Blood soaked his shirt, dark and thick. He wasn't moving. No, she whispered. No, no. Then his fingers twitched. I ain't that easy to kill, he muttered. Voice a rasp. She almost sobbed. She tore strips from her dress, pressing them against the wound. He winced, but didn't stop her. His skin was hot. Too hot. I have to stitch it, she said. He nodded, jaw clenched. Her hands shook as she worked. When it was done, she wrapped his arm tight and pressed something into his palm. The blue ribbon. Her mother's. You're not my father, she said, eyes burning. He looked up at her. But you should have been. He stared at the ribbon in his hand like it was a message written in a language he'd forgotten how to read. Later, when the sun had fallen behind the ridge and the air grew cold again, he stirred and looked over at the baby, sleeping in Hattie's arms. She looks like a Clara, he said. Hattie blinked. Clara? He smiled weakly. That was my daughter's name. Hattie looked down at the baby, then back at him. She does, she said. She really does. Colt laid his head back against the tree and closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, and for the first time in years, his hands were steady. Colt's wound never fully healed right. The bullet had gone deep, and though Hattie's stitching kept him alive, the way he moved after the limp, the slower draw of his breath, it all told the same truth. He'd given more than he had left. Still, he didn't complain. He just strapped on his coat, hoisted the baby onto his back in a fur-lined sling, and started teaching. Hattie learned fast. He showed her how to hold a rifle steady, how to track game by hoofprint and scat, how to spot a snare in the underbrush, and how to set one of her own. They walked through frost-bitten meadows and narrow deer trails, the baby quiet as snow against Colt's shoulder. She learned how to ride, first with him behind her on the saddle, then alone, reins gripped tight, eyes fixed ahead. They moved. West, always west. Past burned-out churches and half-frozen creeks, through valleys the world seemed to have forgotten. Colt said there was a small post tucked into the foot of the Redstone Hills. A man he knew ran it now. A man who asked no questions. That was all they needed. A place where people vanished without vanishing. A place where no one would come looking. When they arrived, the town was no more than 12 buildings and 24 eyes too curious for their own good. Colt went to the judge first, straight-backed and grim. Hattie stood behind him with Clara pressed to her chest, a blanket around them both. The judge looked them over and sneered. "No mothers under 14 allowed to settle," he said, tapping his ink-stained fingers against a wooden desk. Colt said nothing. He turned, walked out the door, and into the saloon down the road. It was a quiet place, all old whiskey breath and flickering lamps. He unstrapped the leather satchel from his shoulder, set it on the bar, and pulled out a saber, its handle etched with dust and wear, its blade clean and sharp despite the years. He laid it flat in front of the barkeep. "She ain't asking for charity," he said, voice low and cutting. "She's asking for land, same as any man." No one argued after that. They were given a stretch of land 2 miles west, just beneath the tree line. Colt and Hattie built a cabin by hand. The first weeks she nursed Clara while Colt cut logs, even as his shoulder bled again and again. She patched him up at night, singing soft lullabies she'd half forgotten. Sometimes he'd fall asleep with the baby curled against his chest, her breath sinking with his like they were part of the same broken rhythm. One night, just as spring tried to melt the snow, a shadow returned from the past. The saloon doors creaked. A man stood there, ragged, bruised, missing part of an ear, one of the bandits from the forest. The one Colt hadn't finished. Colt stood to meet him, but his side gave out, wound reopening, blood soaking through his shirt. He staggered, tried to raise his rifle, but it dropped from his grip. The man grinned, then a shot rang out. The bandit stumbled, eyes wide with surprise, hand clutched to his gut. He crumpled to the floor. Hattie stood behind him, holding Colt's revolver. Her hand didn't shake. "He taught me to aim," she said, "but you gave me a reason." Colt didn't say a word. He just looked at her, and then at Clara, sleeping in a sling across her chest. They built their life slowly, day by day. The cabin grew sturdy. Hattie planted a garden. Colt carved a wooden cradle from pine, tying the blue ribbon from Hattie's wrist onto one of its spindles. The sign above the door was his final project. "Mercer and daughter," it read, letters burnt deep into the wood. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Clara took her first steps in snow, bundled tight, toddling toward Colt's open arms. Hattie hummed the tune her mother used to sing, something about lavender and riverbanks, long forgotten by everyone else. Some nights, when the fire crackled low, Colt would sit on the porch and watch the stars. Hattie beside him, Clara asleep between them. He never said much. Just nodded once in a while like he was answering a question only he could hear. Some folks are born fathers, some learn to be, and some just show up when no one else does. That winter, a girl became a mother, and a man remembered how to protect something worth dying for. If stories like this move you, if you believe no one's too broken to protect what's right, then comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more true-hearted tales of the wild frontier. The chimney smoked steady. The cradle rocked slow. The rifle hung above the door, quiet now, and the ribbon stayed tied.